U.S. President Donald Trump has frequently referred to climate change as a hoax, and his administration continues to pull back on efforts to deal with it both at home and abroad. Trump recently announced that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA, is revoking a long-time climate policy. It is reversing a scientific finding that has long underpinned key environmental legislation in the United States. President Trump pointed a finger at former President Obama when he made the announcement.
In 2009, Barack Hussein Obama, his EPA designated fossil fuels such as oil, gas, and other things that actually make factories rock and roll and other things drive very nicely as a threat to health and human welfare, known as the endangerment finding. This determination had no basis, in fact, had none whatsoever, and it had no basis in law.
Trump's decision to repeal the landmark climate finding is very controversial and is set to face a legal challenge from health and environmental groups. To discuss the fallout from all of this, joining me now is Lisa Sachs. She is director of the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment and an associate professor at Columbia Climate School. And also with us is Michael Shank. He's an adjunct professor of sustainable development at New York University. Welcome both of you to the show. Lisa, let's start with that. Simple question. What is the fallout from all of this?
The fallout from this is not actually even deregulation. It's massive destabilization and uncertainty, which is the worst possible context for American industries, businesses, and households. Even from the perspective of trying to support U.S. businesses, this is now causing mayhem and just going to cause massive regulatory uncertainty, regulatory fragmentation, because every state and city and around the world, there are going to be different regulatory standards. It's expanded legal risk for industries because actually the EPA's authorities to preempt private action against the industries. So it's really created a very complicated landscape for U.S. industries that's going to have high costs for American industry and for American households.
Michael, let me ask you about this. I mean, his action reverses a 200-page document, if you will. It's got evidence, research backing up what it's saying. But, you know, he's dismissing climate change as a hoax. He's calling the climate scientists stupid people. And despite the action itself, it's also messaging. And there are people who listen to the president and kind of go on what he says. Talk to me about the damage in both categories.
Well, what the executive branch is saying with this move is that they don't care about Americans' public health or public safety. And increasingly, the Make America Healthy Again movement is witnessing this because the Trump administration is doubling down on dangerous greenhouse gases. It's doubling down on pesticides. It's doubling down on forever chemicals. And even the MAHA movement is seeing this and is troubled by it. We know that these greenhouse gases, which now the executive branch is saying it doesn't want to regulate, we know that these greenhouse gases kill Americans. 200,000 Americans die prematurely every year because of these greenhouse gases. And that's why 20 years ago, we launched into this, nearly 20 years ago, we launched into this endangerment finding because there's danger in these greenhouse gases. And so it was an attempt to protect American health, protect American safety. It's why we have things like seatbelts and speed limits and hard hats in industrial zones. It's why we have FEMA to protect Americans. It's why we have a Defense Department to protect Americans. And here the executive branch is saying, we don't care about American public health. We don't care about American public safety. Have at it, fossil fuel companies. Pollute all you want. We're not going to interpret the Clean Air Act in ways that for decades the U.S. government did.
Lisa, talk to us about the domino effect of this, because you know, when it comes to fighting climate change, there needs to be concrete commitments and actions, especially from the big emitters. And I mean, when you look at the big emitters, the United States is the second largest emitter of CO2. So what does this do in terms of like other countries who are just sort of like, oh, we kind of maybe need to make commitments, but oh, well, the U.S. isn't doing this. I mean, talk to us about the spillover impact.
Yeah, I think there are many different spillover impacts, but actually the rest of the world is not going to follow the U.S. down this path. The U.S. is ceding leadership and the ability to set the rules and to be competitive in the future. But maybe I'll get to that. Let me answer your question about the spillover effects. First of all, just to completely agree with Michael, the one massive spillover effect of any deregulation of these toxic emissions is going to be extraordinary costs for the U.S. people, not only in terms of health, Michael's exactly right, but those costs are borne by society. The healthcare system is going to have the cost, but also the physical impacts of climate change, we're already seeing in our country, of course, around the world as well. Floods, wildfires, droughts. These are happening with increasing intensity, increasing frequency, and with massive high costs. And insurance is becoming more expensive. Houses are becoming less insurable. So the fallout effects of not regulating and not trying to control emissions are massively inflated costs, greater trade-offs, greater fiscal strain for states, and greater costs for American households. The rest of the world is moving on with a climate agenda for two very practical reasons. One is that the rest of the world recognizes the cost of not preparing or not trying to mitigate climate change because they see the effects and the costs, and so they're trying to mitigate it. But more importantly, actually, many major global countries also see the opportunities of investing in the future, of supporting green industrial policies, of producing the technologies of the future, of creating more flexible, integrated energy systems. So the U.S. is just ceding leadership in this area, and I don't think it's going to bring the rest of the world's industries down.
And Michael, Lisa making a really good point. Last year, devastating when it comes to extreme weather all across the globe. So how critical is 2026? How dire does the climate change issue become with this new setback?
Well, Lisa covered the spillover effects that we'll see going forward. But for anyone who doesn't believe the climate science, and clearly the Trump administration is saying it doesn't care about the science. That's what it's saying with this finding and the rolling back of the endangerment finding. But even if you're part of the Republican following and movement and voting base, this is poor use of public resource and public tax dollars. As Lisa already noted, we're paying for fossil fuels. We directly subsidize fossil fuels at $35 billion a year, and indirectly at well over $750 billion a year in the cleanup of spills, leaks, et cetera, the negative externalities associated with fossil fuels. So already we're paying for these choices. Fossil fuels were the fuel of the 20th century, but they won't be the fuel and the energy of the 21st century. And other countries are clearly realizing that. You already mentioned that, Mike. China, well over half of new vehicles purchased in China are electric. Almost 100% of new vehicles purchased in some European countries like Norway are electric. Other countries have transitioned to the fuels of the future, the energies of the future, which are infinite, not finite like fossil fuels. So with solar now as the cheapest electricity in history, it makes a ton of sense in terms of responsibly managing public resources, these natural resources, and public dollars in terms of either direct or indirect subsidies to transition to the fuels and the energies of the 21st century, which are clearly the infinite ones like solar and wind, not the 20th century fuels. Fossil oil, coal, and gas, like Trump mentioned.
Okay, to your point, Lisa, I was in China last year. I was at some of these EV plants, and they're just churning out these cars like crazy. They're going in one direction, the United States going in another. Trump saying, this is going to be cheaper cars, more jobs. Talk to us about that argument.
Yeah. First of all, most of the industries that are energy intensive require long-term predictability and stability to be able to make effective investments in the future. Automobile companies right now are designing cars for a decade from now. They need to have predictability and certainty about what that landscape is going to look like. Now, of course, in the US, we absolutely don't have that. So investments are going to be on hold. The cost of capital becomes higher, and everyone bears the cost. But of course, as Michael just said, EVs are absolutely the vehicles of the future, and China has dominated that market. And now not only in China and in Europe, as Michael said, but we're seeing an explosion of EVs in Africa and other parts of the world because they are the most efficient, in general, electrified, not only cars, but also electrified heat pumps and others are more efficient than their fossil fuel alternatives. So the real tragedy for U.S. industry and for automobiles is that in this very short-sighted, absolutely corrupt, by the way, ruling, the American industries have lost the ability to plan for the future and to make coherent investments in what are going to be the future industries. And so I actually don't see how we recover from that unless we can get back on course very quickly.
Getting back on course, Michael, of course, that would require legal challenges. We're obviously going to see those from environmental groups and health groups as well. But we've also seen how cumbersome that is in the United States. I mean, just recent ruling on the tariffs, but it seems like that case started forever ago. A lot of damage can happen during that period of time. Give us the sense of what it looks like as far as the legal landscape out there.
Yeah, Mike, you've already mentioned some of the lawsuits that are already out the door by environmental groups and health groups, public health groups for the public health and public safety reasons we've already discussed on this call. We will continue to see lawsuits by states against the federal government as the executive branch is ceding control over these dangerous gases and saying that Congress should pick up the slack here, and that if we want to legislate, then Congress has to legislate. So we'll see it gummed up in the courts for years to come. And in the meantime, this administration is doubling down on 20th century fuels at taxpayer expense, poorly managing both the public resource and public tax dollars, all at the expense of public health and public safety. Meanwhile, other countries like China, Lisa already mentioned, China's outpacing the world in wind and solar technology, EV and battery technology, and heat pump technology. So we're losing these markets while Trump is doubling down on fossil fuels. So you can imagine a future 2030, 2040, 2050. The rest of the world has transitioned to green energy, renewable energy, because it is infinite. We will have solar and wind for the foreseeable future, while we in the United States double down on oil, coal, and gas, all at public health, public safety, public resource, and public tax dollar expense. So that's the decision that's being made here. Hopefully Congress will see the light, and hopefully the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement, will push the administration in the right direction to make, indeed, America healthier again in all the ways, because that is the role of government, to keep us safe and secure, which the executive branch has decided not to do in this case.
Lisa, I kind of to piggyback off what Michael just said, former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry had this to say. I'm just going to read his quote. China is now producing more wind, more solar than all of the rest of the world put together. That's what they're doing. They're deploying it. Do you think they've taken a stupid pill or something yesterday and decided to change their entire economy to meet this new standard? No, their population wants clean air. I think the American population does too, right?
The American population is being very misled and confused by a confused administration and a confused media landscape, by the way, that can't help us sort out fact from fiction and to understand really what the rest of the world is doing and the reasons behind the movement in China and in the rest of the world to produce the technologies and energies of the future. Of course, climate change is so real, so dangerous for all of us, and we're going to bear the costs. But for China, this is about energy security, energy reliability, affordability. It is about having a globally competitive industry, which they are absolutely doing. They've been exporting their solar panels to the rest of the world already for many, many years. So this is an economic move. It's a security move. It's a resilience move, affordability from China. So, and Americans, I think, don't really understand that. We're not being explained that that is what's important for industry. One thing I just want to quickly say about the perspective of supporting industry. The worst thing for industry is inconsistent and incoherent regulatory frameworks. The Trump administration is purporting to have helped industry by deregulating, by creating chaos. But what China has done, and to some extent what Europe has tried to do too, is to actually smooth the regulatory landscape to align industrial policy with market demand, with support for technologies. That is supporting industry in a more coherent and more aligned investment environment for industry so that they can plan for the next 10 years. So if the administration wants to support the industry, that is the way to do it. Understand where the world is headed in 10 years and make a coherent landscape that aligns support for the companies, the financing ecosystem, the market demand, and the tools that the U.S. government has to shape market demand, and to align with the global direction of travel so that the U.S. can continue to be competitive in the global environment.
Lisa, Michael, thank you so much for your insights. It's been a great discussion. And for some more international perspective on these developments, I'm joined now by Andy Mock. He is Senior Research